All right, I think we're good. So, good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. And welcome to today's Maple Conference panel discussion. My name is Brian Tour. I'm a director of marketing here at MapleSoft, and I'm really honored to be moderating today's session. Today's topic is an important one. We all know that there's a lack of diversity in STEM, and there are many groups missing from our classrooms, our lecterns, and our workforce. It's interesting. I think it's safe to say that the general awareness of the lack of diversity and the need for diversity has never been higher, yet progress seems slow, definitely slower than it should be. And that right there is a huge problem. I mean, we know this exists. We know that important voices are being excluded, and we know that we're being harmed by not being as diverse as we should be. But at the same time, moving forward is challenging. And at an individual level, it's difficult for many of us to know what we can actually do about it, or even how to recognize barriers that exist beyond our own experiences. And that's what we want to discuss today. We only have an hour, which is obviously nowhere near the time to adequately tackle something like this. But we thought it would be a great opportunity to hear from colleagues who have a wealth of experience, personal, academic, professional, with diversity and inclusivity. And the hope is that we can open some eyes, inspire some, and hopefully provide some ideas for things that we can start using in our own schools and workplaces. And I guess just before we get started, then just a brief technical note or a logistical note. We would love to make this as interactive as possible under the circumstances. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them, and you can do that using the panel in your within your Zoom or send it by chat, however you want, and we'll try to get to them. And just to make this as much of a good discussion where you're involved as possible. So before we get started, I'd like to quickly introduce the panel. So in no particular order, I'll start with Dr. Anita Layton of the University of Waterloo. Anita is the Canada 150 Research Chair in Mathematical Biology and Medicine, a professor of applied mathematics, pharmacy and biology, and Associate Dean, Research and International at the Faculty of Mathematics. Dr. Layton works hard not only to achieve a high degree of diversity and inclusivity in her own lab, she also spearheads a number of equity initiatives at Waterloo, including chairing the Research Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Council and the Math Rachel Equity Committee. So thank you for being here, Anita, and welcome. Next up is Kyne Santos. Kyne is a world-class drag queen who's appeared on Canada's Drag Race and is a passionate mathematics communicator. She has a Bachelor of Mathematics from the University of Waterloo and is known for making educational videos on YouTube and TikTok, where she blends her love of mathematics with her love of old school glamour and reaches her audience of more than 1 million followers. Kyne is also an advocate for increasing diversity within STEM, and works with multiple companies and institutions to assist with their initiatives. As a quick aside, Kyne has worked with MapleSoft on some of our own diversity initiatives, and I can say from firsthand experience that her work is very inspiring. So welcome, Kyne, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me again.
Next up is Dr. Lancelot Goodin from Durham Technical Community College in North Carolina. Dr. Goodin currently serves as the Dean of Building, Engineering, and Skilled Trades at Durham Tech. His research interest is in gender and racial equity, momentum, and collision related to community college STEM transfer student success. Lance is passionate about impacting change to improve student success proportionally among community college STEM transfers. So welcome, Lance. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Brian. Well, glad to be here for one.
And last but certainly not least is Dr. Vasilin Junich of Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, BC. Dr. Junich is an award-winning teaching professor at the Department of Math at Simon Fraser. In addition to his research and teaching, Vaso developed the Math Catcher Outreach Program, a program focused on bringing math to Indigenous communities using multiple methods, including storytelling, pictures, models, problem solving, and hands-on activities. Thank you, Vaso, for being here, and welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone.
All right, so to get started and to perhaps frame this discussion in some ways, I thought I would start with Lance. Lance, you've spent a great deal of time studying diversity. It's clearly a central focus of how you approach your teaching and academic career. I guess from a large kind of, the 1,000-foot view of what we're talking about here, like, how do you define diversity and why is it important?
Thank you, Brian, for that question. So in terms of how I define diversity is a perspective of how we, improve that. So diversity, particularly in STEM, which is specific to my research and applicable in a broader context, it requires, concerted effort to identify the differences and commonalities among us as people, a society, acknowledge, embrace the uniqueness of each individual. And, with intentionality, we want to continue to strive to include the perspective of all, in our decisions, in our practices. And I think that speaks to how MapleSoft has evolved over these years. It's because, we have acknowledged and recognized those differences and tried to include the perspectives why we have evolved. That this is important as we make these efforts to recognize these differences, that it speaks to innovation. How do we improve innovatively? We improve the quality of lives of all. It's important to think about those perspectives, at that level, and recognize that each individual brings assets. I think from my perspective, when you think about diversity, we don't, often individuals look at that from a deficit mindset, as individuals are lacking. But in my perspective, there's no such thing. Every individual brings unique skills, that serves as assets that really drives innovation in the work that we do. So in a nutshell, that's my perspective from an asset-based approach in terms of the strengths and perspectives individuals bring, and why it's so important to talk about diversity, live it, and be truth in terms of how we think about this work improving society as a whole.
Thank you. That was excellent. You mentioned a number of things in there. You used the word inclusion. Inclusion and diversity they're very often lumped together. They're obviously incredibly related. But I see them. They can sometimes almost be same sides of the same coin. Like sometimes you could have one, or it's possible to have one without the other. Like, for example, it's possible for an institution or a classroom to be diverse, but not inclusive, and vice versa. Similar to the question that I asked Lance, and I'm looking at you, Kine, how would you define, like, we heard from Lance a little bit about, how he looks at diversity, and, there's, it's an asset to have to have as many different types of people and types of voices it leads to innovation. In a classroom setting, how would you define inclusivity, and like, looking at your experience as a student, why is it important and what does it mean to you?
Sure. So I just graduated from university studying math a year ago, and as a student studying math, I think that math, obviously I'm a huge math lover, but I think that math and STEM, there's more to diversity than just having like many different kinds of faces teaching. I think, the important thing about inclusivity is diversity in the ideas and the methods of teaching. I remember being in computer class, or computer science rather, and just like hearing all these examples of, cars and racing and all these things that I just like could not relate to at all. And the important thing about diversity is that I never assume that other people learn the exact way that I do. And when I'm like talking about math online, the big message that I get from other people is, oh, math seems so different when it's taught to me by a drag queen. And, maybe that's because the way that math is taught in schools is very, I don't want to say straight, but it's very textbook. There's a certain curriculum that so many people follow. And I think that the advantage of diversity is having unique creative perspectives and approaches to teaching that really reach a wider array of people. And, you know, as I said, people learn in different ways. And I think that's really the advantage of having diverse perspectives in teaching.
Thanks. You raised an important point. You raised, you know, curriculum and textbooks. They're written a certain ways, or they're written a certain way. And I mean, there's biases. I mean, there's biases in everything. And some of us think of math as kind of being bias free, right? A number is a number. The equation of gravity, I mean, it's the same for everyone. It just describes gravity, no matter where you're from. But there are biases inherent in how those concepts are taught. Veso, you in all your work, like to help introduce Indigenous youth to mathematics. I mean, you've learned about the challenges of adapting pre-existing curriculum, like to different groups, and you've changed in some of the ways you approach teaching, and you approach introducing math in different ways to these different, you know, to the groups that you're working with. What are some of the challenges that you've learned about, like, for adapting pre-existing curriculum content? What are some ways that traditional curriculum has failed at being inclusive?
Oh, thank you. I would. This is a difficult question, you know. But I would rather talk about the attitude towards mathematics. You know,
okay.
Through my outreach program, I traveled across British Columbia and Alberta and visited more than 600 classrooms. And this is a great learning experience also, that you see how our society is diverse. You know? And the challenge is really, how do we make our trade, mathematics or STEM, that reflects that diversity from our society. There is so much talent out there, but also there is so much resistance to accept mathematics what it is. Mathematics as a human way of dealing with reality. We put mathematics, and Kyle mentioned this in a way, we put mathematics in our classrooms on the board. We make it a set of rules and abstract concepts. And then we ask, how come the students don't see that this is relevant to their lives? You know, in that way, I go to grade 5 classroom, and I see young person saying, I hate mathematics. What happened? How do we change that attitude? And that attitude is related to way how we teach mathematics. And it is related to curriculum that we present to these young people, that we turn them away from mathematics at early age. And that is one of my wishes and my goals with this outreach program, really to try to bring a positive experience to young people, and with mathematics, positive experience with mathematics. So I think that is a really challenge. How do we make young people aware about the importance of, in my case, of mathematics for their lives, for their everyday lives?
I think there's another layer to that as well. I feel like there are certain groups that are even discouraged more than others not to participate in mathematics, and that to me is a massive problem. I have a young daughter, and I mean, it's not cool to like math when you're a young girl, right? And that's a problem, and that extends to so many different groups and so many different areas like that. Yeah, it is a challenge for sure. Anita, some of what we've discussed so far, we're talking about experience and challenges related to the classroom, about getting students excited and doing those kind of things. But as we know, research is a very fundamental aspect of academia, and it's so important that the output of our institutions and what appears in journals also reflects a wide variety of backgrounds and is as diverse as we're trying to make our institutions. In your experience, what are some of the challenges inherent in achieving this? What are some of the unique challenges to research that go beyond what we're seeing in the classroom?
So it's all related, right? So, people need to get an education in the science before they can move on to research. So, lots of problems. So, I mean, diversity is one thing, right? Having different people doing the research and having different people, as students, we do lack that. But diversity is only the very first step. Before I came to Waterloo, I was in North Carolina, like Lance, and I work at Duke. The focus has always been diversity. Let's get more Black faculty. Let's get more women. I was the only woman in math, Duke math, by the way, for many years before they hired a second one. Let's recruit more, female grad students. But then I tried a lot. I did a lot for them to, get like women or minority grad students. But then I saw them falter. You just get them here and then you forget about them. I check the number, I get the number, and that's it. So diversity and inclusivity is not really the same thing, or equity, right? Diversity to me is the easiest one. Throw some money at them, do something, right? Get them to come and then move on to your next target. So I see that a lot. And I mean, I kind of see why institutions will look at it that way. They worry about, the number and how it looks and, I don't know, things like that. But having people here and making sure that they thrive is really, really difficult. So I think I kind of forgot what you asked me. You asked me about our research, right? Okay, let me get back to that. So there is people aspect of the research, and there is research aspect. So I do math biology. So, early on, you were going through my affiliation, which I'm sure nobody was paying attention to. I kind of straddle between mathematics and biology. I really love science. I wanted to be a physics major, but then I realized I was an undergrad at Duke, and then I realized I trashed basically every single physics lab. I cannot do anything. You said something about gravity, the same. No, when I measured gravity, it was 3. It was not 9.7. I have no idea why that was, right? So when you cannot do experiment, there is so much there was so little. There was only so much you can do in physics. So I decided I'd switch over to math and model stuff. So I'm basically a scientist that uses computer to do it. And so I work with a lot of experimental data from biology and from medical field. And the gender bias, let's not even talk about race, right? So most of the people who participate in clinical trial or even animal, okay, you do animal, you experiment a drug on animal, on rodent, on rats. And if you look at literature from maybe 10 years or 20 years ago, they are almost always male rat, unless you're studying breast cancer, okay, then you have no choice, right? So it's always just the male rat. And if you go back 20 years or 30 years ago, they don't even tell you the sex of the rat. They just assume you know what it is. And how do I tell? Well, because of the weight, right? Rat and people are different. Male rat are much bigger than female. Anyway, so almost all the experiments were just done on half of the population. And then you expect the result to extrapolate to the other. Oh, does it always work that way? Oh, I can tell you that's not like that. I can rattle to you, name me an organ in your body, I can tell you the major sex differences. And it's not just limited to the reproductive system. I'm not going to go into biology too much because that's not what this is about. Even clinical trials, the same thing. So there was this big clinical trial about 20 years ago at Harvard University about aspirin. Aspirin, we all take them, and it involved 22,000 people. How many of them are women? 0, sich, nada. So women are not included in such an important trial at all. And again, it's assumed that whatever that's experimented on you will extrapolate to me. Well, like Brian, right? So there are lots of differences between you. You're a man, I'm a woman. You're Caucasian, I'm Asian, right? So there's lots of differences that people don't understand. So that aspect is the research aspect about different type, diversity in things that are or species or animal or people that you are studying, that people are just starting to recognize, right? The importance of it. A few years ago, NIH in the US and then CIHR, the Health Funding Research Agency, started to mandate the necessity of including sex and considering sex and also gender, which is social construct. So that's a slightly different thing, as the important biological variable. So that's the important part. So that's about research. So I'm really into, considering sex differences and race differences in research. I can talk to you all day. I wrote op-ed in Globe and Mail and things like that. So I'm really into it. Can I also say something about education? I mean, honestly, I haven't taught in a classroom for 3 years, so, but I really care about it. But they're only 24 hours a day, so I decided I have to give up something. Can I say something about that?
Yes, absolutely.
No, I babble on. Okay, so about education, I feel really strongly about this. So you talk about your child, right? About if not being cool to do math. So I can tell you my experience with my son. It's not just about math; it's science and engineering in general. Okay, so my son is now 14. So this happened when he was about 5. So we were having dinner, my 2 kids, my daughter and my younger son, and then my husband. And then my son said when he was 5, and he said, "Oh, when I grow up, I'm gonna marry my best friend Sam." Okay, so he's a little boy. So I thought, okay, whatever. And then what was it? Said, okay, I said, oh yeah, when when you're old enough, when you're 25 or something, you can marry whoever you want. I don't care who you marry. Just be happy. And then his father was like, no, that won't do. You can't marry Sam at 25. You need to be 27. Okay, so that was the end of the conversation. Okay, and then 2 days later, I was folding laundry in my bed, right? And then my son was because he was so young, he actually loves mommy. So he was there keeping me company. And then all of a sudden, he forgotten about wanting to marry his best friend. And now he's thinking about marrying a girl. And he said, "Mom, I will never get married." I thought, oh my God, what happened? Did you have a fight with Sam or something? He said, no, there is no girl in engineering. So that's what he said. Okay, there is no girl in engineering. He loves engineering. Oh, actually, more specifically, he loves electrical engineering. Okay, he loves that. And he said he's never going to meet a girl because that's where he's gonna be. Okay, which maybe is true, but so I thought, okay, this cannot do. Okay, how can my son? I'm really, really shocked, right? This is my son. Okay, he grew up in my house. His mom is a mathematician, right? His father was a mathematician too. So how did he get this freaking concept? There is no women in engineering. I totally failed as a parent, right? So I feel really bad. So I made a point of introducing him to all my, girlfriend in engineering. So that cured that problem. But if you step back and you ask that question, how on earth did he get that concept? Definitely not from me. I hope it was not from me. But then, if you think about it, he was 4, it was 5. Where did he get this information? Oh, let's see. Maybe the TV. Yes, I let my kid watch TV because I cannot be parent 24 hours a day. So his favorite show at the time was Phineas and Ferb. Have you watched Phineas and Ferb? Okay, so Lance have watched Phineas and Ferb. So has Kane, maybe. So this is a show about Phineas and Ferb, 2 brothers. Okay, they're really creative. They're really the best inventor ever. So they make all these cool things. The biggest, roller coaster, some machine that can translate, animals. Talking to human language and things like that, right? Really cool stuff they make. And these are boys. All their friends are boys. The biggest villain, who also are quite inventive, I would say, also boys. There was one girl, well, maybe 2. There was this girl, I forgot her name, in the show. And what does she do? She jumps around and say, what does she say? What you doing there? What you doing? What you doing? And that's all she does in the show. Okay, so this is how little boys get the idea of gender roles. Okay, boys, you are creative, you make stuff and make great things for yourself. And if you're a girl, you jump around and see how your favorite guys are doing.
There's yeah, and I'm very familiar with Phineas and Ferb, and that's just one of tons of examples of just inherent biases that we're picking up. And and you mentioned that, like, there in just an inherent bias with that aspirin study that you mentioned, or with the rats. Just this idea, like, no one would even think to ask what or no one even think to question, like, what are the genders, or the study would just go with with tens of thousands of males to see the effect of aspirin, and no one would think about that. This, I mean, especially in education, I mean, this happened. This is a societal problem in general, but in education, this happens everywhere too. And we've talked a little bit about curriculum or other things. Lance, and I'll ask, maybe I'll go around the table a little bit, but in your experience, like, within teaching, within curriculum, like, where do these kind of biases, where do they show up in places that we don't really think about, that we're not even aware of, but we're kind of perpetuating like we're thinking it's just not as diverse. It's with the current material, or where it just doesn't take into account diversity. Where's this happening that we're not aware of?
Thank you for that question, Brian. And it speaks to, in my perspective, our pedagogy, day-to-day intentionality in terms of how we deliver instruction. So those biases, I mean, is just a myriad of options to consider. So, some of the dimensions when you think about diversity, it could be socioeconomic status. So when we think about the use of technology, we have to acknowledge the era we're living in, right? In the pandemic and the technological divide that we're now more aware of, right? And as we think about how we deliver instruction and our pedagogy in delivering instruction, how that impacts low income, communities, individuals. And when you think about those who are low income for various reasons, think about the population who are more likely to fall in that category, Black and brown populations, right? So those are things that, I think it's our decisions that we're making in instructional technology, the pedagogy in doing that, right? And how it impacts those populations. That's the piece we're missing, and we think about, we all familiar with the use of Maple and how different communities and institutions adopted software. But then the reality is, if one of the focus is on the instructor use and skill sets, right? Think about then the challenge in terms of access, right? From the student perspective, who falls in those categories. So, one thing we want to continue to recognize are disadvantaged communities who may not have access. And what's compounding the challenges and barriers, Brian and everyone on this call, is essentially the other factors in terms of pedagogy and the skill sets of the instructor, and the instructor recognizing the differences of the population here they're actually delivering instruction to. So, and as I said, quite a lot I think I'm saying about the focus is on really access and disadvantaged communities that's often overlooked when we think about pedagogy and intentionality in how we deliver instruction, especially in this era.
And so in doing that can be a challenge, right? Because and this is actually related, I just got a question from a member of the audience. I mean, it's hard to do that if you're not a member of the group, or if you don't recognize some of those challenges, right? Like some of we all have our own backgrounds, and we live in our own bubbles in a lot of ways. It's very challenging to identify and be able to do that. Now there's no easy answer to any of this, but are there some examples of ways that and I'm still looking at you, Lance. Yes. Are there some examples of how to recognize some of these barriers? Are there examples of, like, what would you suggest? What would be some of your advice for someone putting together curriculum or thinking about these issues, like just really practically, how can this? There's got to be things that we can do to make some of this better.
Yes, it's really design thinking and from the perspective of the user. So one aspect in terms of, I talked earlier about the asset-based approach, I'm very student-centered. So think about the user-centered, right? So when we get the voice and input of the user. So this now speaks to inclusivity, right? So you recognize what differences, and then we be inclusive in the groups that we're serving. So, to be more specific, for example, I was teaching the Calc 3 online this past summer. And one of the things, of course, the Maple user, I'm very active in how I utilize Maple throughout my Calc 3 course. And I remember giving, an exam online, but with video on and, observing students. But the reality is, in a traditional class, an hour and 30 minutes. But then these students are doing the exam, then I didn't think about, right? One, access to technology, the interruptions that they may have experienced and the challenges from my demands to upload your exam. And the student said, Professor Goodin, could you allow additional 10 minutes to then scan and get my exam into you? So, that was an aha moment. It may seem simple to us on this call, but, sometimes it's the simple things we overlook when we transition and we think about the populations we're serving and the access they have to this. Another example is really just a simple lesson that, if we're teaching a lesson, let's just say in derivatives and we're using a dynamic approach, but while it may be appealing to us, right? Is it truly appealing to the population of your classroom if you're unaware of how they learn best, not only in skill sets, but their cultural backgrounds, right?
And
you kind of...
Brian, can I add something?
Yeah.
So there is technology, like familiarity with technology, there's access, but there is and culture, and there is also your comfort or your comfort in navigating the new world that is college. So for instance, when I was at Duke, I was very into making sure that the first gen student do well, and it has been an unsolved problem, and it remained an unsolved problem after I left. So if I look at my two kids, right? So I have a girl and a son, and since they were born, they've been hanging around mom's office in the mathematics building of Duke, for what? I said, like I said, since they were born, right? So I would take them to university. When I go on a field trip with my college student, sometimes they tag along. So being around college students, talking to professors, they grew up with two professors in the family. And all mom and dad's friends are professors. They don't have no qualm talking to professor. We do not intimidate them, right? So they are very comfortable. I mean, we talk about how things work in the university. So if they have questions, they will not be afraid to ask. Well, they're kind of shy. They're not as outspoken as me, but still, they're not intimidated because you have a PhD. What is a freaking deal? Mom has one, okay? And it's just mom, right? However, if you're never around anyone with the degree, then it's intimidating, right? So you have problem, scanning your exam and send it to Dr. Goodin. Some student may be brave enough to ask. Some will just freak out. Okay, it's my fault. Okay, I'm dumb. I don't want to ask because I'm scared now, right? So your level of comfort navigating university or any environment is very much impacted by your background. And I don't know how to solve that problem, but I think as instructor or as somebody who deals with students, we just need to be aware of this major difference.
Yeah, it occurs to me as well, like in listening to your stories and some of what Lance was talking about. I mean, there's a real harm in not taking this into account. Like there's a real harm when you're only testing male rats for a study. There's a real harm in assuming everyone is at the same level of, has the same level of technological capabilities. And if that's the assumption and we're leaving some out, like there's real talent that we're leaving on the table because of something that's kind of out of their control. Like there's a real harm when we're not taking this into account. It's these stories are, I'm thinking about that a lot as you're speaking, of just like the harm in not being diverse. It's like there are real reasons that we need to be taking into account as much as possible, right?
But these are things that we need to keep learning, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I try to think about other people's perspective. Do I always get it right? I don't, right? Once in a while, I realized, oh my God, I missed that perspective and I caused harm. So I learned. And then let's make sure I don't do it again. And then in a few more weeks, I did it again and I learned. So this is something that we need to learn. And as instructor, you play a major role possibly in the development of some young mind. So it is a very big responsibility, and we should all take it seriously. And it's not just about okay, what is the best way to present a proof? And it's really different depending on who your students are.
Well, yeah, and it goes back to, I guess, one of the questions I had earlier, like, where is this happening that we're not aware of? There's, and, Kind, looking, going over to you for a second, like from someone who just came through lots of years of education and we talked a little bit earlier about inclusivity and, about the importance of that. In some of your experiences as a student going through the system, and seeing all of the way that math was taught to you and the stuff presented in curriculum, where are some of the areas in that we don't notice, that are just kind of hidden and assumed to be correct?
I feel very thankful. I grew up like in progressive schools, and especially growing up as a young boy, I definitely felt represented in math. I definitely felt like encouraged to be creative. I mean, I took it for granted that, the main characters on Phineas and Ferb were boys just like me. But, growing up as a gay boy that was very flamboyant and very feminine, that part of my identity I felt very ashamed about, because I felt like all of my teachers, all the examples that I was seeing were mathematicians and academics who were very professional, very straight, very, they were always in suits. And I sort of felt like I was an imposter. I felt like if they ever discovered how gay I really was, and how, I talked with a little raspy voice and a limp wrist, I felt like if they ever discovered that about me, that like I was going to be exposed. Right. So that definitely steered me away from wanting to be in academia, because I just felt like nobody would ever take me seriously. Right. But luckily enough, I came out of the closet, and I discovered that my teachers didn't actually really care about whether I was gay or not. They loved that I was very nerdy, and they loved that I had a passion for math. And in that sense, that wasn't really a barrier for me. But, I get messages all the time from people who say, "Oh, Khan, I love your videos. I really want to show them to my teacher, but I don't want to out myself as a gay person. I don't want my teacher to know that I'm watching videos of a drag queen." So I take it very for granted that I grew up in somewhere that's very progressive. But not everyone has that experience. Not everyone can show their parents, "Hey, Mom, look at this like drag queen teaching me math on TikTok." Some people have to hide that part of their identity in order to fit in their classrooms.
And again, I mean, that speaks to the harm when this doesn't happen. Like, that will turn off a certain group of people, right, from pursuing this, and they'll try to do something that is more stereotypically proper for them, right? It's a problem. I got another question from from an audience member, and Veso, it's related to the curriculum. It's related to inclusivity, and the question is, if we want to make curriculum more inclusive, is that a matter of just being more creative when creating the content? So, thinking about these things up front and trying to do things in many creative different ways, or is it getting a more diverse range of ambassadors? So, yeah, I'll let you answer that. I have my own interpretation, but I'll let you answer that.
Thank you. I don't think that curriculum is a well-defined term. Curriculum is something that is always changing. There is no community in the world with a fixed math curriculum. There is always something that needs to be removed from that curriculum or added to that curriculum. So I don't really think that curriculum itself is a solution or it's a real problem. I really think that the problem is going back to how do we make mathematics relevant to lives of our students? How do we make entries into mathematics approachable to our students? Their way of, I think Lance mentioned this, at least he made me think about question, am I teaching mathematics or I'm teaching students who study mathematics? That is a big challenge for math teachers. And my personal view is that I'm teaching students who study mathematics, not mathematics. And for me, as a teacher, again, yes, I need to meet when I teach. And I'm teaching right now a pre-calculus course online with 200 students. And you could imagine what kind of challenge is this, to reach to reach out to my students and to give them a space that they can enter university mathematics at the level where they are comfortable. So again, I don't think that curriculum itself is the really issue here. The really issue is how do we present mathematics to our students that they find it interesting, that they find it challenging, that we support their talent. Many of my first year students, they're not aware of their mathematical talent. They need support there, And I see my role as a teacher really to make that space for them that they can explore their mathematical talent and develop it further. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but back to that curriculum. Curriculum is in change all the time. It continues change. And there is no society that is happy with the math curriculum at any level. But I should maybe say one more thing. When we think about our math teachers, we don't think about the great theorem they proved that we are still impressed. We think about those math teachers that influenced our lives as people. And we should be aware, and this is something that Anita mentioned already, we should be aware that our students actually listen to what we say. And that better we pay attention about what we are saying in front of our students, And maybe just to reflect something that Kain said, things are slowly changing. I've been involved in a first year Mathematics in Canada initiative that connects teaching faculty, mathematics teaching faculty across Canada. And that community is now diverse. There is a wave of young university math teachers that is coming, and that community is, judging from our meetings, as diverse as our society is.
Thank you.
Can I add something as well, Brian?
Yes, please.
So I think students learn well when they feel that they are doing well in class naturally. I mean, I see that in my daughter, poor 18-year-old daughter who started her first year at Waterloo this term, and she will tell you she's not having a great time. But let's not go there. But I feel like our measure of success sometimes is also quite limited. Let's talk like Putnam, for example. We all know, the Putnam exam. That Waterloo does very well in, by the way. So I remember when I was at Duke, Duke recruits kids from high school specifically to compete in Putnam, right? So they will go around and, go to Olympia and stuff and recruit this kid to become Duke undergrads, so that with the sole purpose that they're going to represent the school to do Putnam. I don't know how many other schools do that. So if you look at how the Putnam exam measures success, basically, you have a few questions, 10, I don't know. I never competed in it, by the way. I'm not good enough, consider it. So these are very, really hard questions, and they measure your ability to find a trapdoor in some ridiculous setting, okay, under 5 minutes, okay? If you can look at a problem and think of some really weird way of solving it in under 5 minutes, then you will do well in Putnam, right? So some kids do very well, but I feel like that is like one measure of success. I was never trained that way. I cannot do that. Give me a problem, I have to think about it. I think about it really hard. Okay, I think about it for 2 freaking weeks. Maybe when I was showering or shoveling snow, and it's starting to snow here now. Lance, you wouldn't understand. You're in beautiful, warm North Carolina, but it's snowing here in Waterloo, okay? So when I'm shoveling snow in driveway, that's where I get my insight. For 2 weeks, I had to think about it really, really hard. Putnam will say I failed, okay? And that's why I never represented Duke when I was an undergrad. But the thing is, there is more than one way to be successful. And we typically don't recognize all of it. We recognize kids who come up with things really quickly, right? Like I remember like in in first year calculus, I know kids who go into class and then they look around and there are, all these, Putnam kids who raise their hand and answer all the questions that the instructor asked. And they ask really, really hard questions. And then you're like, okay, so this is what a math major looks like. And I don't look like that. So let's do something else, right? So that can be really discouraging to students who actually have talent. I mean, I think I did quite well professionally, but I can't come up, I'll definitely fail the Putnam, right? Because that's not my way of thinking. So there are many ways of thinking, and somehow we need to be recognized, them as well.
Yeah, thank you. Believe it or not, we're actually starting to get a little short on time. I just want to remind anyone in the audience, if you do want to ask a question, use the QA panel, and we can hopefully get to that. I've had a few so far. A question though, and Lance, I'm kind of looking in your direction. So I think it's safe to say that many of us we want to advocate for this more. We see the need, we see the harm that can occur when we aren't including enough groups of people, when we're leaving people at the side. But it's challenging to make change. It's challenging to make change in a lot of cases due to things like institutional inertia. Your boss might have personal opinions that make this difficult to establish D&I programs or to make the changes that are important. How can we advocate for diversity with people who don't understand its importance? What are some of the most effective ways that you can think of to make the case for diversity and inclusion, like within an organization? What are some of the roadblocks, or what are some of the challenges that you've encountered when trying to do the work that you've been doing?
Great question, Brian. So the challenges is multifaceted because it continues to evolve, which is fascinating. Because you learn more about the beliefs and perspectives of the individuals you work with, and to be more specific, it's the intentionality of the work they're doing. So yeah, I think it goes back to a point Anita made back. Are they doing the work to check the box, or do individuals really understand why the concept of diversity is important? So one of the roadblocks, has to do with, of course, you talk about institutional inertia, but think about assess the landscape, globally, nationally, locally, regionally, see where your institution lies. I think one of my recent changes is moving to an institution that makes us a focus of the strategic plan, and then use those pillars to kind of drive the work and give them, the faculty you lead, a global perspective. Let's step outside and see why this is important, providing national data, help them, qualitatively and quantitatively, and help them understand what this means for society. I think in my perspective, it's been a little bit easier, and the pandemic has done a lot of harm, but also using that, leveraging the challenges and loss of life from the pandemic to really communicate the importance. And that has been a little bit easier, and faculty has been more receptive, because the reality is, here we have, look at a change in population that's increasing over time, that's underserved, and help faculty realize the importance of the work if they aren't really intentionally serving a population that's fast growing and a population that's not equipped, for their life and for society. So it just depends on the perspective in which you bring. And then it goes down to teaching and learning. And one of the things I'm driving now is the idea of, cultural responsive pedagogy. And this, this has many dimensions, but my focus is on the instructional dimension. And this is really how the instruction become culturally responsive. And it goes back to recognizing the cultures of your region, the institution, your classroom, and be willing to change, and not this cookie cutter approach that this particular technique will work every semester, but the ability to get faculty to understand the importance of being receptive to change, for an ever-changing population and what that means for society as a whole. So, it could be a lot of approaches, but I think we're in an era where we can use the pandemic and the work that lies ahead and to really drive the importance of change and how we should be receptive to the populations we're trying to serve.
Thank you. And doing a lot of and explaining a lot of what you just mentioned. I mean, it has to be tough. What do you, I'd be curious, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'd be curious, like, do you have a particular success story? Is there anything that, like, can you talk a little bit about some accomplishments that you've made along that direction?
I think, and celebrate the small wins. And that's always my philosophy. And accomplishment is now my faculty are talking more about it. And now they're getting a broader perspective, one they never had before, because now that impacts how, and I keep saying faculty because they do supervise mid-level managers. We're also faculty. They're now thinking more about how they hire, right? Beyond just technical skills. So those are small, in fact, big wins, because the reality is when that changes the perspective of the faculty and the leaders, then in my perspective, that is huge success, because that in turn impacts how curriculum is delivered and how they view student success. And back to Nita's point, the measure of success, they're more inclusive, when they're more aware of the populations in the classroom. So it's really, it's multifaceted approach in terms of how you work on changing individuals' perspective with a variety of ways of presenting, the challenges that lie ahead. And in doing that, then they're more receptive to, I think that they're more reflective on their work to then improve on their skill sets and recognize that they themselves, may very well are lacking in some areas and can improve and grow.
I really like the one, I like all of that. I really like the one thing you said, like, appreciate the small victories. When we're looking at a topic as wide and as complicated and as just as big as this, you can't, I guess the phrase is, you can't boil the ocean, right? You should look at doing some small things, or, where can we make changes? What small things we can do will start making impactful changes right away. In one of your, I'll let you, well, you made the suggestion during one of our talks, or used this example during one of our talks at MapleSoft, where you made the comment that, small things, even like changing the wording of a math problem that is delivered to students to make it more inclusive, to recognize some of the small little biases that are in it. Is everyone that's portrayed in math problem, does it all assume one culture or one or one gender or anything, or whatever. It's the small things that I think are important. Are there any other examples? And I'm looking at, we're down to about 5 minutes, but I'm looking at all of the entire panel right now. Are there any small things? Are there some small examples that people in the audience, we have teachers in the audience, we have students in the audience. Are there some small things, a little bit of advice or some tips that we can kind of take back to our workplaces, immediately and start using? Veso.
Yeah, if I may give an example from yesterday. And this example is with the message we need to listen to our students. We need to find a way to listen to our students. So yesterday during my online office hour, I had a student from my pre-calculus class asking me to explain marking on the recent quiz. And the students write their tests through our Center for Accessible Learning. So students had some learning challenges. And teaching assistant marked this with 1 out of 8. But when I looked through this and talking to the students, it was clear that students did mental calculations. So students was able to give the answer by skipping the steps or putting the steps, expected steps, in different order. And we need to be ready as educators responsible to help these students. We need to be ready to recognize this and to support that kind of thinking, that individual way of thinking about mathematics. So my message would be, let us listen to our students.
And I think that is probably a great place to end this on. It's been a terrific, inspiring discussion. I mean, I feel like that hour went exceptionally quickly, but unfortunately we've reached kind of the end of our allotted time. There were a number of questions. I'm sorry to some of the people in the audience who sent some questions. I received some comments, a couple of nice compliments. A huge thank you to all the panelists for a very engaging and inspiring discussion. And there were a couple of others as well. So thank you, everyone. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to everything. I want to extend my gratitude to each of our panelists today. And I mean, thank you very much for your participation. I think this was very, very good. Hopefully inspiring for the people in the crowd. And yeah, thanks once again to everyone. And I hope everyone continues to enjoy the 2021 Maple Conference.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers. Thank you, Brian, for moderating.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely.